snare drum sounds in my arsenal, this is far and away the one that I use the most. And I use it a lot. The number of songs that I've used this sound on is almost hilarious.
Maybe it's time.
Side to side, and so at ease.
It's just really safe. It's super consistent. It has a nice crack without being too high pitched. It has enough bottom without clouding anything up. My friend Devin affectionately calls this one Snare Sample A because it really does sound like something that you might find scrolling through a sample pack. And because it has some of those characteristics that a lot of guys look for in samples, no one is ever going to tell you that it sounds bad. And here come the comments. Okay, so how do we get it? There's a number of different factors that make this particular drum sound the way it does. Now, I don't want to focus too much on the drum itself because this is really just a way of tuning and setting a drum up to sound like this. There's a lot of different snare drums that I can get this sound on, and I almost use it as like a litmus test for whether or not I like the way that a drum sounds. Let's get into what we need. First things first, it's gotta be wood. I don't care what kind of wood it is, but there's an inherent warmth that you kind of need out of the shell to really get the sound to work. You can do it on metal shells, but the bright, resonant quality of those drums really doesn't lend itself well to this ultra-focused sort of thing. Personally, I prefer maple. I think that wood has a nice balance of highs and lows without the mids getting too crazy. You could just as easily do it on birch. It's just gonna be a little drier and less resonant. And understand, it'll still work really well. This is all about getting a sound as focused as we possibly can because we want it to be so consistent. I've also found that shallower drums kind of handle the sound a little better. It's going to be most at home and at like a 5.5 inch shell. Go any shallower and you start to lose bottom end. Go any deeper and you start to lose the top end crispness and some of your stick articulations. The next most important thing is going to be the head choice. For this sound, my preferred choice is the Aquarian Focus X with the reverse dot. It's a coated single ply head with a reverse dot and a muffling ring on the underside. I like the Aquarian version the best because of the coating, and I also think that their film is the brightest and most present sounding of the big three, but the Remo Power Stroke 3 or the Evans Genera will serve you just fine. Really what we're looking for is a single ply head that has that muffling ring. It's gonna keep the overtones that we want and get rid of the ones that we don't. The drum still has a little bit of ring to it, but not enough that it's ever going to piss off anybody. For tuning, I like to get this drum's fundamental notes somewhere between an F sharp and a G sharp. Admittedly, that's kind of a wide range, but you never really know how the head is going to be sitting on the drum that particular day that you tune it. And understand, that note means shit. It doesn't mean anything. Tuning your drum to a note isn't going to make music. It's just, this is, oh, he's getting angry now. This is just, it's a way to keep my tuning practices consistent so that if I know where the drum is sitting, if I break a head and have to change it on the fly, I know exactly the range that I can get it into because of the way that it's gonna sound. So to do this, I get the bottom head at around a G sharp, and I get the top head between a C and a D. It really is kind of a sweet spot to have the snare drum in. If you go any higher, the drum kind of starts to choke out, and if you go any lower, you lose all of that beautiful articulation. Just perfect right where it sits. If you do any of the combinations of the things I've mentioned, you're gonna be right in the ballpark and you'll be good to go. But how can we take this even further to get even more focus and even more articulation? Something I started doing a little while ago was cutting my snare strands down to just 8 wires. Removing all that pressure off the bottom head is gonna take away almost all of your snare buzz, which is gonna make your bandmates love you, but it's also gonna open up the drum a little more and let through a lot more bass frequencies and sort of that punchy, in-your-face kind of energy that you would have lost if that bottom head would be muted by more strands. Not to mention, your ghost notes become instantly easier to play. So we've got a pre-muffled head at a focus tuning to help control our overtones, and we've got a really narrow snare wire to combat the snare buzz. The only other thing that we can start playing around with are these guys. The hoops that you put on your snare drum affect the sound a lot more than you think. Most drum companies today put triple flanged hoops on their shells from the get-go. Another popular choice would be die-cast hoops. Triple flange hoops will give you a much more open and lively sound. Die-cast hoops will kind of choke out some of the higher frequencies and make the drum a lot drier. But there's a beautiful middle ground between these two, and that's the S-hoop. Now the S-hoop is the same weight as most triple flange hoops. It's 2.3 millimeter, but because of the large inward flange that it has, it retains a lot more rigidity. So it really sits in a nice place between the super dry die-cast hoop and the super open triple flange hoop. On top of that, it creates a really large contact zone for rim shots and cross sticks, and I think it makes both of them sound better. And not that this really matters, but it makes it a hell of a lot easier on your wrists on a long gig, and it'll save your sticks. So when you're making a snare sound, it really is all about this 3% here, 4% there. All of these little tweaks and changes are greater than the sum of their parts. The end result with this one is something that's ridiculously consistent. Takes EQ really well, will stand out in a mix without being overbearing, performs well in a lot of different room settings. It's just, I don't know what I would do without this sound in my arsenal. And seriously, I can't stress enough that you can make this sound on any snare drum. I don't care what kind of snare you have. If you have a shallow wood shell snare, you can get this sound. It's just a matter of the right tuning and the right attributes. All right, enough of my rambling. Let's actually hear what this fucking thing sounds like.